Welcome to the absolute dumpster fire of an origin story that is DC Comics. You'd think the company that brought us Batman, Superman, and made us buy Funko Pops that we really didn't need would have started with vision, ambition, and artistry. Nope, it started with debt, like literal crippling financial debt. So in the 1930s, this guy, Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson, decided he was going to publish comic books, which sounds pretty normal now. But back then, comic books were basically considered toilet paper with pictures. The man was publishing these cheap-ass pulp stories, calling them new fun. And by fun, I mean he forgot to pay his bills. See, Major Nicholson's problem was that he was all vibes, no money. He wanted to make a publishing empire, but he had the financial literacy of a raccoon in Walmart. So who swoops in? Harry Donenfeld. And this guy is not some angel investor. No, Donenfeld was a printing plant owner, and he made all his money from porn. Yeah, DC Comics, the people that would eventually bring you Superman fighting the Nazis, was basically kept alive by a guy making dirty magazines. Which, honestly, respect. I mean, every great empire's got to start somewhere. You know, Rome had roads, America had railroads, and DC had titty mags. So, Nicholson is drowning in debt. Donenfeld is like, sure, I'll bankroll you. But the little twist here is when Nicholson can't pay back his loans, Donenfeld just takes the company. Like Monopoly rules, just straight up snatch and grab. So now it's 1938. Donenfeld now owns what will become DC Comics. Nicholson got booted out, and the company was basically born out of a hostile takeover. But hey, that same year, they published Action Comics #1, which you might know because it starred this guy. And suddenly, DC Comics was printing money. Superman was a cultural nuke. Kids were buying it, adults were buying it. Probably the same parents banning their kids from rock music later were also buying it. Superman wasn't just a hit. He was basically the birth of the superhero genre as we know it. And DC, being the savvy businessmen that they were, did what every good company does whenever they have a successful idea. They cloned the hell out of it. So Superman's making more money than Donenfeld's sketchy magazine business ever could, and DC is like, quick, we need another one. Enter Batman. Now, Batman is a weird case. He's basically Superman's complete opposite. No powers, just terrible, terrible vibes, and a lot of trauma. Created in 1939 by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. And here's a fun fact. Bob Kane took all the credit, while Bill Finger did basically all the work. Seriously, Kane just wrote his name on everything. Finger actually designed the costume, wrote the stories. He even came up with the Joker. Basically invented Gotham. And DC was like, yeah, but Kane's our guy. Poor Finger didn't even get official credit until 2015. Which is absolutely insane. But Batman sold like crazy. Kids loved him. Parents probably didn't, since Batman's early comics was basically just him yeeting dudes off the tops of buildings, which he still does, but, you know, now he does it with a rope. Like, no joke, Golden Age Batman was essentially just a straight up murderer. He carried a gun, strangled dudes, tossed them into acid, and while Batman and Superman were printing money, DC decided, you know what, let's just keep making new heroes until the paper shortage kills us. So along came Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, The Flash, Aquaman, Hawkman, basically an entire zoo of people. And Wonder Woman obviously deserves special mention, because holy hell, her origin story is absolutely insane. She was created by psychologist William Moulton Marston, who was also the guy that invented the lie detector. Oh, and he was in a polyamorous relationship, and he was really into bondage. That's why Wonder Woman comics were 50% action and 50% roleplay, which honestly explains a lot. Meanwhile, DC realized that having all these heroes running around was cool, but what if they all teamed up? And enter the Justice Society of America. Kids loved it, and sales went through the roof. And DC was basically the king of the Golden Age before it was really known as the Golden Age. But then came World War II, and during wartime, superhero comics thrived. Superman punched Hitler, Batman was fighting Japanese spies, Wonder Woman was recruiting kids to buy war bonds. But after the war, yeah, suddenly superheroes kinda looked goofy. So what did DC do? They merged with All American Publications in 1944, bringing in even more heroes. But sales were tanking. Superheroes were fading, and genres like horror, crime, and romance were taking over. Oh, and a fun lawsuit side plot. DC saw that Fawcett Comics had a character called Captain Marvel, not the Marvel one, the Shazam one, who was outselling Superman. And DC basically said, that's illegal. Sue their ass. DC dragged them through a 12-year legal battle. 12 years. And by the time DC finally won, superhero comics were already dying so hard that Fawcett just kind of gave up anyways. They literally stopped making comics. DC was like the playground bully that beat up a kid so hard that he just straight up dropped out of school. But they weren't much better off. By the early 1950s, most of the characters were either irrelevant, canceled, or just plain goofy. Superman was still around, Batman was floundering, It was looking grim. The Golden Age had ended, and DC was stumbling hard. But little did they know, the Silver Age was about to slap them in the face and bring superheroes back in a way they never knew possible. Okay, so the Golden Age was dead. Superheroes were basically considered cringe, but in 1956, DC was like, wait, what if we just rebooted all our old characters and pretended nobody noticed? And somehow, it actually worked. Enter Barry Allen, the new Flash. Barry Allen wasn't your old Flash in a tin hat. He was sleek, modern, had science powers, instead of just, I run fast because I have this metal helmet. And boom, kids absolutely loved him. Flash basically kickstarted the Silver Age of comics. Then came in Hal Jordan, the new Green Lantern, which now there are a lot. Suddenly, superheroes were hot again, and DC were like, well, fuck it, let's just revive everybody, get everybody out here. You know what I mean? I'm talking Aquaman, Hawkman, Atom, Martian Manhunter. All back, way more shiny, and with a lot more sci-fi involved. But the real flex, in 1960, DC pulled a power move and formed the JLA, the Justice League of America. And kids went nuts. A whole team of superheroes in one book? Groundbreaking. It was basically the Avengers, except 40 years earlier and without Disney money. Now here is the spicy bit. Marvel was watching, and they were like, wait a second, people actually want superhero teams again? And that's how Stan Lee and Jack Kirby birthed the Fantastic Four. So yeah, DC's revival basically directly caused Marvel's rise. DC accidentally created their own rival. Like a boomer teaching a kid how to code and then getting replaced at his own company. But hold up. Wait a second. The Silver Age of DC wasn't all wins. Because in their infinite wisdom, they decided to get real goofy with continuity. Enter the multiverse. So, in 1961's Flash of Two Worlds, Barry Allen meets Jay Garrick, the Golden Age Flash. And DC is like, oh, Earth 2 exists. Boom, fixed it. Suddenly, every contradiction, every retcon, every goofy Golden Age plot hole, it just happened on another Earth. Problem solved. Except no, problem not solved. Because DC eventually had like 97 Earths. Each with their own Batman, obviously. It was chaos. Reading DC Comics was like doing homework for a college course you didn't even sign up for. But people ate it up. And sales were insanely strong. DC was riding high. Marvel was catching up. And superheroes were officially back. Which brings us to the 1960s. DC is king. Marvel's creeping up fast, and suddenly there's competition again. And competition makes DC do some weird ass things. First off, Marvel's characters were kinda relatable. Spider-Man was worrying about rent. The X-Men were outcasts. The Fantastic Four argued like a real family. Meanwhile, DC's characters were perfect. Superman was literally untouchable. Batman was basically the perfect detective and still is. Wonder Woman was stuck with weird bondage metaphors, and so Marvel just kind of starts stealing the youth. And DC panics. Enter Carmine Infantino, the guy who basically reshaped DC in the 60s. He pushes for slicker art, fresher stories, and most importantly, tries to make Batman relevant again. Because Batman, believe it or not, was tanking. Sales were so bad in the early 60s that DC almost canned it. But then 1966 happened. The Adam West Batman TV show dropped, and it was an absolute explosion. Campy, goofy, just pure Saturday morning, energy. That's all it was. Batman went from near cancellation to basically being a global superstar. And DC was like, this is it. This is the formula. The problem? The formula aged like milk. By the 70s, people were already sick of bam, pow, sock. But DC being DC, they did not know when to quit. And then there's the go-go checks. Yes, for some reason, DC thought the best way to compete with Marvel was to add little checkerboard patterns at the top of every one of their comics. Their logic? So kids can see our comic books and they stand out on the rack. Spoiler, it obviously did not work. It looks stupid. Like, imagine Nike's big plan to like beat Adidas in sales was just to put a checkerboard pattern on all their boxes. That is objectively dumb. But the bigger blow was Marvel eating DC alive in cultural relevance. Marvel had college kids reading Spider-Man. DC still had Superman solving problems by like throwing planes into space. And then came the nuclear bomb. Jack Kirby left Marvel. The king of comics himself jumped ship in 1970 to DC. And Kirby was like, cool, I'm gonna create the fourth world. That's right. Jack Kirby invented Darkseid. Mr. Miracle, New Gods, the whole cosmic pantheon. It was revolutionary, ambitious, and it didn't sell at all. Because DC had zero idea how to market it. Kids did not care about weird space gods. They wanted Batman punching clowns. So Kirby's magnum opus got chopped down. And DC was back to scrambling. By the end of the 60s, Marvel had completely overtaken DC in cool factor. DC still had icons, sure, but they were looking old, like your dad trying to say yeet in 2016 during Thanksgiving. And DC is about to walk face first into the gritty 1970s, where things got pretty messy. So, it's the 1970s. Nixon is shady, In comics, they suddenly grow up. Remember whenever Batman was doing the Batusi on live TV? Yeah, that aged like mayonnaise in the sun. So DC said, screw camp. Let's make Batman scary again. Enter Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. These dudes drag Batman back to his roots. Gothic, moody detective vibes. They bring back Joker as a homicidal maniac instead of just a clown with joy buzzers. And suddenly, Batman was cool again. But O'Neil and Adams weren't done. They looked at Green Lantern, who at the time was boring as hell, and said, what if we stuck him with Green Arrow, a socialist hippie who lectures about racism? And that's how we got one of the most infamous comics ever. Green Lantern Green Arrow number 85, where Green Lantern's sidekick Speedy is revealed to be a heroin addict. Yes, Robin Hood's mini-me was shooting up smack. And DC put it right on the cover with a giant-ass needle. The Comics Code Authority, the censor squad of the time, was like, you can't do that. And DC basically just went, watch us. And now DC was edgy. They tackled racism, poverty, overpopulation, even nukes. For a hot minute, DC felt relevant again. But Superman was flailing. The movies with Christopher Reeve kept him alive and, like, in the public eye, but in the comics, he was still kind of just a Boy Scout snooze fest. Like, his biggest crisis was deciding which of his 47 girlfriends to marry in an imaginary story. But the true Bronze Age chaos came in 1985, when DC looked at their continuity mess and just said, screw it, just kill it with fire, burn it all. So here's the deal. By the mid-80s, DC continuity was a disaster. They had like 50 Earths, multiple Supermen, 5 Flashes, 3 different Wonder Women, and basically no one knew what the hell was going on. New readers were basically lost instantly. So DC pulled the nuclear option. Crisis on Infinite Earths. This was the first real mega crossover event. The one that set the template for literally every big Marvel or DC crossover in the future. Whole universes were destroyed. Heroes died. The multiverse was nuked into one Earth. It was absolutely insane, brutal, and confusing as hell. But it worked. Kinda. Supergirl, dead. Barry Allen, dead. Dozens of universes, dead. DC was reborn with a streamlined universe. Except, spoiler, they immediately screwed it up again with retcons on top of retcons on top of retcons on top of retcons on top of... But hey, Crisis is still iconic. Then came the Edgelords, though. 1986 was absolutely insane for comics. DC dropped The Dark Knight Returns. Frank Miller basically making Batman a fascist old man who punches mutants in the face. Not those mutants. And Watchmen. Alan Moore asking, what if superheroes were just depressed Nixon-era psychos? These books were not just hits. They redefined comics forever. And now DC wasn't just superheroes. It was literature. Oh, and don't forget Batman the Killing Joke. The one where Joker cripples Barbara Gordon and possibly assaults her, depending on how dark you want to read into it. So DC got the rep for being dark, gritty, and for adults. And sales absolutely skyrocketed. They even spun this into Vertigo Comics in the 90s. Basically DC's weird goth cousin. That's where you get Sandman, Preacher, Hellblazer, all the artsy emo books that your Hot Topic clerks like worship. But here's the twist. While DC was busy winning awards for dark masterpieces, their main superhero books started drowning in the same grim tone. Suddenly every story was rape, murder, or what if Superman snapped? Which is still a thing to this day. Jesus Christ. God damn it. They created the modern superhero arms race of Edge. Pause. And boy did it bite them in the ass later. In the early 90s, comics are booming. Mostly because nerds thought that they were gonna retire off collector's editions comics with full covers and holograms. Kind of like Pokemon cards. Spoiler, they didn't. But at the time, sales were insane. And DC had a problem. Superman was getting boring again. He's too strong, too perfect, and too invincible. So the writer's room literally said, what if we just kill him? Enter Doomsday, a giant gray Hulk and spiky shoulder pads who shows up, grunts, and proceeds to beat the ever-living shit out of Superman until he dies. He dragged that man through Metropolis like crazy, boy. He was doing Superman insane. And it worked. Holy hell did it work. The comic sold millions. News anchors treated it like an actual obituary. People lined up around blocks to buy The Death of Superman. Issue sealed in a black bag with a bloody S logo, which is kind of crazy. That sounds like a fucking cult. Holy shit. That sounds like a fucking cult. What the fuck do we got going on around here, cuh? What the fuck? What the fuck? What? Fun fact, most of these issues are worth like $5 today because everyone bought like 10 copies thinking they would like be expensive as shit nowadays. Sorry boomers, whenever you buy a shit ton of something, it makes it less rare. That's how it works. But Superman didn't stay dead. Oh no. DC milked that cash cow for years with the Reign of the Supermen storyline. 4 imposters showed up claiming to be the new Superman. A teen clone with an earring, that was Superboy. A murdery Terminator version of Superman, Cyborg Superman. Blacksmith with a hammer named Steel. And an edgy, no, I totally need sunglasses indoors style Superman named Eradicator. Eventually, the real Supes came back with a black suit and a black mullet because, it was the 90s. And while all this was happening, DC decided Batman needed his own traumatic event because watching your parents die is obviously not traumatic enough. Which brings us to Knightfall. So basically, Batman in the early 90s was on a complete hot streak. Thanks to the Tim Burton movies, DC wanted a storyline just as dramatic as Superman's death. So they said, what if we just break Batman's back? Because he hasn't been through enough. That's right, Bane, in his debut, juiced up on Venom steroids, breaks into Arkham Asylum, releases every single villain, and forces Batman to fight. Like 20 psychos in a row. By the time Bruce gets to Bane, he's exhausted, and Bane just snaps him in half over his knee. Like, holy shit. Batman was paralyzed. So he gives the cowl to a French-Canadian Catholic named Azrael. Problem is, Azrael's a little bit of a psychopath, and starts just murdering dudes left and right. Gotham basically goes, yeah, this Batman fucking sucks. Eventually, Bruce takes back the mantle, and all is well again. But this storyline showed one thing. DC loves replacing its heroes with edgier stand-ins, and the 90s did not stop there. Oh no, this was the decade of grim dark everything. Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, he turned evil, became Parallax, and even slaughtered people. Aquaman grew a beard, lost a hand, and replaced it with a harpoon. Wonder Woman, she was replaced with Artemis for a hot second. Flash, Wally West took over after Barry Allen died, which I personally prefer Wally West, so I don't really fucking care, because I grew up, watching, this shit came out way before I was born, but I grew up watching, the old, DCAU shit, the DCAU animated shows, Batman the Animated Series, I had that on disc set. DC was basically swapping heroes like Pokemon cards because edgy reboots sold like crazy. But the bubble was about to burst. The comics industry crashed in the late 90s. The speculator market crashed, and suddenly DC was stuck with 10 grim dark replacements and a continuity so messy, it made a plate of spaghetti look organized. So, you already know what comes next. Another crisis. By the late 2000s, the DC continuity was a bloated mess. You had multiple Supermen, dead but not dead Flashes, Batman with a robot replacement, and 6 versions of Hogman, all contradicting each other, which I don't really think anybody cared about at the time, because who the fuck cares about Hogman? I just offended somebody whose favorite character is Hogman, but who the fuck cares? Even DC editorial went, we need another crisis. Enter Infinite Crisis 2005. The big gimmick, remember those survivors from the original Crisis on Infinite Earths? Earth 2 Superman, Lois Lane, Superboy Prime. Yeah, they'd been chilling in a pocket dimension for 20 years. Watching DC get more and more edgy and more depressing, and they absolutely hated it. Superboy Prime especially. He breaks out, starts punching reality, quite literally, and his punches retcon continuity. That's right, DC retconned and explained continuity errors by saying, this guy just punched the shit out of the timeline. So Infinite Crisis reshaped the multiverse again, but it didn't actually fix any of DC's problems. In fact, it arguably made them worse. But fans kept buying because Crisis on the cover just kind of guaranteed sales at the time, and probably nowadays too. If they release a new Crisis, that's just gonna off the shelves. Then came Flashpoint 2011. This one's on Barry Allen, and basically solely Barry Allen. Barry decides, hey, I miss my mom. I'll just go back in time and save her. Classic. Except by doing that, he absolutely wrecked the entire timeline. Superman ends up a lab rat. Batman is Thomas Wayne, but with guns. The Joker is Martha Wayne. Wonder Woman and Aquaman start World War III. And Cyborg is America's #1 hero, which W. It's bleak, it's violent, it's obviously DC's favorite type of comic to write. Barry realizes that he screwed everything up, so he runs back through time to reset it. But when he fixes things, surprise, it's obviously not the same. He didn't fix it. It's a reboot. This is the New 52. Every character's history was squished down into 5 years. Batman somehow went through 4 Robins and Jason Todd died all within half a decade. Superman got armor instead of underwear. Wonder Woman became Zeus's daughter. It was sleek, it was edgy, and obviously it was confusing as shit. Fans were split. Some loved it, some hated it, but DC was like, it's fine, until we reboot again in 5 years. So the New 52 burns hot for a couple years, then it starts to fizzle. Sales drop, continuity confusion grows, and fans start rioting on forums. Cue DC Rebirth in 2016. Jeff Johns basically walks into DCHQ with a giant post-it note that says, hope and optimism, and he just slaps it on Superman's face. Rebirth wasn't really a hard reboot, it was more of a soft one, restoring classic elements like legacy, families, and characters that the New 52 just kind of erased. It worked. Sales spiked. Superman got married to Lois Lane again. Wally West came back like the original one. Fans were happy for 2 years. Then, more crises. Because, of course, we got Dark Knight's Metal. Batman meets evil multiverse Batman, including Batjoke, aka the Batman who laughs. I hate this character. I just don't like this character. The design's cool. The Doomsday Clock, the DC vs. Watchmen crossover, where Dr. Manhattan basically dunks on Superman. The Death Metal, Wonder Woman basically just chainsaws the multiverse in half. Don't ask. By 2021, DC was juggling Infinite Frontier, Future State, and like 12 Bat books all at once. At this point, the multiverse is just kind of a suggestion. Every story is canon, and also not canon at the same time. It just kind of depended on the editor's mood. Then came the dawn of DC, the latest branding initiative where DC promised fresh starts, big stories, and Batman. It's always Batman. Jim Lee, legendary artist, is now president of DC, which is wild because he started at Marvel, then founded Image, then Wildstorm, and now he's literally the king of DC. Talk about career climbing. Today, DC is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. You know, with shows like Peacemaker, the new Superman movie, Creature Commandos, you know, shows like these, like the new DCU. The comics do sell, but not like the old days. The movies keep rebooting, but now we're probably in a spot where they're gonna stop, hopefully. And the multiverse, forget it. Every reboot just resets the reset anyways. So what's DC in 2025? A company that's been around nearly 90 years, founded on debt, lawsuits, and pure chaos, surviving by constantly killing and resurrecting its own character and itself. And yeah, so that's the history of DC. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. You know the deal. If I missed anything, like a specific event or comic that you wish I would have talked about, let me know down in the comments. And yeah, peace.